Good morning and welcome to our next stop on the virtual field days. I'm Terry Bossel, Extension Field Agronomist, and I'm at the Northeast Research and Demonstration Farm near Nashua. The Nashua Farm is one of the locations with ongoing research being conducted by today's presenter, Dr. Antonio Malarino. Thank you for joining us for the virtual field days. We look forward to seeing you at future field days. And now we'll turn it over to Antonio.
Okay, good morning. This is Antonio Malarino. I bet many of you have heard me speaking Spanglish during many years in Iowa fields or in conferences. We are here today to do this virtual field day, which is the first time, The main objective of this field day is to talk about some long-term trials which are really a signature of what the research farms can do, for agriculture. We can do these long-term experiments with different treatments, management systems that we cannot do, in farmer fields. So back when I came to Iowa in the early 90s, I was surprised. I was working in South America, that there wasn't much data or information about phosphorus and potassium placement, P and K, as we say. And then what they told me is that there is no difference, Antonio. So, well, for 3-4 years, I did many experiments with broadcast. But I have that it can be, especially in those years no-till was growing in the state. So I thought I need to do something to really see what's going on, because the other research had been in the 50s or early 60s and with tillage. So I wanted to do something different. So we began with the help of the research farms, the Leopold Center at the time, and the Iowa Soybean Association. We began 5 huge experiments at 5 research farms that they are at the Northwest, Northern, Northeast, Southeast, and the Southwest research farm that is called Armstrong Farm. So the objective was to see, okay, what happened with P and K fertilizer placement for corn soybean rotations managed with tillage, the classic chisel plow disc, or no-till. Okay, that was the main objective. So we have different rates of P and K, and in order to learn more, we actually have corn and soybean each year with identical designs. Okay, because that way we can switch every year. Okay, so we have now 24 years of this data, and these experiments, together with like 100 that we did in farmer fields, are the basis of the current recommendations that we have in Iowa State for fertilizer P and K placement. Okay, so the important thing to realize is that with effect or not of the fertilizer placement, we cannot really see visually, in a field day. So we are standing here because what we can see is essentially the effect of the P or the K in growth, you see? Then I will show you some data about what we found. Now, if you look here, the beans where I'm standing, you can see that the color is kind of greenish pale, and then we have this kind of symptoms typical of potassium. You see, and if we go down the plant, you see, we can see even then more clearly. You see, classically when the beans are short, see, say V5, V6, we see the deficiencies only in the other leaves. But then when we are at this stage of growth, we start seeing deficiencies even in the top, okay? Now, over there we have the same beans, the same variety, everything the same, but with potassium adequate, okay? So it is important, especially this year, because with the drought, some potassium deficiencies, are worse than they would be if we had sufficient moisture. Okay? Okay, so this is what we can show, and as I said, we cannot see the difference due to placement, visually, because the first reason is that there were not very much differences, but also because, of course, we cannot see well, especially this time of the year. Okay, now I'm going to explain to you what the placement methods we compare. So that's one of the treatments that we compare. So we compare broadcast, and then the broadcast we apply in the fall, because most people apply here in Iowa in the fall, and lots of research show that it's okay. There is no difference with fall or spring application, and the fall is better because the soils are dry, people can apply it, and then in the spring they just go and plant. You see, they don't need to be applying the fertilizer in the spring. Okay, the other was the planter band. And we began with this classic 2x2. So the planted attachments have this, so you put in one side the band of P or K, and we use a triple superphosphate for phosphorus, but essentially it works the same as in MAP or DAP. And for potassium, we just use potash, potassium chloride, okay? Now, the other thing that I wanted to study was, because in no-till there is this stratification. Okay, P and K don't move as much as nitrogen, okay, in the soil, especially nitric. So when one goes from the classic plow, that you invert 10, 15 centimeters of soils to either chisel plow tillage or to no-till, then we get this stratification. That is that the P and the K tend to accumulate near the soil surface. So you can see in this chart, you see this one is for phosphorus. This is a long-term data. We can see the largest stratification. I mean, that's the accumulation near the surface is more in the no-till, you see, that in the chisel plow or in the old style moldboard plow. Okay. Now, this other chart is for potassium. It's the same thing. Now you can notice right away that the stratification is less in potassium than in phosphorus. That's because potassium moves a little bit more than the phosphorus. So this recycling of the potassium works in a way that it doesn't stratify so much, but it does exist. Okay, so this is what happened. Okay, so because of that, the other treatment was deep banding. Now we had to make decisions. At that time, some people in Western Iowa were starting to experiment with the deep band. So we chose one machine, okay, that is essentially a coulter, a knife, and we decided not to go too deep because that takes more power. And so we deep banded between about 4.5, 5, 6 inches. The other reason is that all our soil test calibrations for soil test method and sampling are done to a 6-inch depth, which is the best. So if we put the P or the K banded deeper, then we need to sample in a completely different way, we cannot compare with existing calibrations and so forth. That's why we did that. Okay, now let's see in terms of the results. What I expected, this is one of the things that happen in science, especially working in South America, where many of our soils have high fixing phosphorus capacity, was that I said, of course, I mean, these gringos are a bunch of idiots, because they should have been putting the P below the surface. It's obvious, there's a difference. Okay, well, after 24 years and hundreds of experiments, this chart shows that there was no effect of fertilizer placement for phosphorus. Okay, it doesn't matter if the phosphorus is applied broadcast, if it is applied with a planter, or if it is applied deep band. Why? I believe the reasons are mainly two. Our soils do not fix much phosphorus. I remember John Webb, old guy that he actually, I'm sitting in his chair now. He retired in the 91 or 92. He said 1 pound of phosphorus that goes in is 1 pound that comes out. And I thought that this guy is crazy, because in other parts of the world that's not the case. The soil is like a black hole that fixes the phosphorus. Okay, here is not the case. The other reason is that the climate. Okay, our soils are great. They have good root exploring capacity. And then, most of the time we are not dry. See, it's wet. So then we get all this root exploring, you know, in the surface. And then in the no-till, actually the broadcast is like a horizontal band, you see? So in other soils, the band in the soil, it helps because it minimizes the reaction of the phosphorus with the soil and the fixation. But in the no-till, it's like an horizontal band, you see? And it's clear, there is data here and also from Alabama, a colleague of mine showed that the phosphorus and the organic matter that tend to accumulate in the top 2-3 inches make that the roots can get that phosphorus easier than one would think. Those are the reasons. Okay, now let's go to potassium. Okay, when we go to potassium, there is a difference. You see, if you look for corn in the chart at left, you can see that with tillage there is no difference at all, which we expected that. But in no-till, what happened? When we get a slightly higher yield, is with the deep band. Okay, and you see that the broadcast and the planter band is exactly the same. By the way, I forgot to say, we use several application rates, but the difference in relative terms were all the same. So what I'm showing here is the average of the rates that we use, okay? So, when we go to soybean, nothing with tillage, and a little bit for the deep band, but essentially the response is in the corn. Now, we had this additional treatment. These were huge experiments, almost 300 plots. We have the P or the K applied every year, or also we did what some farmers do, they put the 2-year rate for the rotation before the corn, okay, for the soybean too. And also we applied the 2-year rate before soybean and then corn, okay? Exactly the same thing. All the difference that I'm showing in these slides were the same. It doesn't matter if we put annual rates, if we put the double rate before corn or the double rate before soybean. Okay, now these results were the first 8 or 9 years of the trials. Because when we found, and we started finding the same thing every year, we couldn't afford be running around with a deep banding all over the state. So we stopped those and we continue the comparison of the planter band and the no-till. So this chart shows the result for the last 12 years of the study. Remember, this is like a system study, okay? And then it's complicated, I know, but essentially, then these are not bars, are lines. And you see that these are percent relative increase in yield in corn. This is no-till. I have the same thing for tillage, but the results were the same. So I'm just showing the no-till because that's what people expect, that there is a response. Okay, so what we see here is that the increase is different in the different 5 research farms, just because the soil tests P or K were different. Okay, so this is phosphorus in this chart. So you can see the response to the broadcast rates in the black symbols, and the banded in the white. We didn't have the very high rate with the planter because it didn't make sense. Okay, so essentially, if you look at all these curves with corn in the top, with soybean below, there is absolutely no difference for phosphorus in the fertilizer placement, which confirmed what we found in the first 80 years that we saw in the previous chart. Okay, now this other one is potassium. Again, potassium no-till. Now, it's the same thing, the percent increase, these are not bushels, okay? This is percent increase. In some sites we have a huge response. So we see the potassium is exactly the same thing, because here we are not showing the deep band than we showed before, okay? So, and in fact, you can see here in a couple of sites that with a high rate applied with a planter of 70 pounds, even if we put it 2 inches to the side and below, we see a little bit of a yield decrease, which it could make sense because of the salt effect. Okay, I forgot to say something before, you see, because I explained the reason why there is no response to the deep placement in phosphorus, but not in potassium. I believe that what happened with potassium is that we noticed that the response, that on average, it's not that much, it was about 4 or 5 bushels on average, was mainly in when we have a dry spell, you know, not necessarily at silking, but in June and early July. So in that case, there is much more potassium absorbed than phosphorus, much more, 2-3 times. So if we have dry the topsoil and there is moisture below, when we put that potassium 5-6 inches and maybe move a little bit, then the plants can get the potassium from there, okay? Now, across all the fields, the response is not that much. It's 4 or 5 bushels. So in our recommendation publication, we say we recommend potassium deep banded, 5-6 inches. For rich till, I didn't say anything about rich till, but in rich till I have other experiments, you know, in farmer fields that is a huge response. And also potassium no-till and strip tillers. But we say, however, with strip tillers and no-till, the response expected may not offset the higher cost of the application. Okay, so really, as one farmer, we worked 6 years with a farmer. I found him, you know, like 4 years later in a meeting, and he said, so, are you doing deep band, you know, potassium? He told me, no. I said, why not? Well, because you tell me in October, if I will have 3-4 weeks dry in June, then I will put it. Okay, so this is what we have and what we recommend. Now, look at this slide. The issue that many people think that phosphorus is great and should be banded is because they see the impact on early growth. Okay? Even with tillage, you put some phosphorus early, you can see this early growth. But what happened? When we measure yield, there is no difference between the broadcast or the placement. Okay, so you can see here that with phosphorus, you know, you put in some phosphorus in the band with the planter, and the growth and the uptake is just incredible. It's much higher than in the deep, but there was no yield difference. However, in the potassium, you see that there is very little effect of the potassium in the growth, but that was when we found the yield difference with the deep placement. Okay. So, in conclusion with all this, the recommendations that we have in our Bible for P&K in Iowa State, PM 1688, okay, the publication, is that phosphorus, it doesn't make difference. We can apply phosphorus any way you want. It's not different except for some starter, okay? A little bit of starter in some condition with a very high residue, very cold soils, very early planting and so forth, okay? There's no difference. However, in potassium, we say with tillage there is no difference. But with rich till, it's a must to have the potassium deep. Now, there is not much rich till anymore. So in no-till and strip till, we say really it's a toss of a coin. See, I'm really not sure if really pays. With the price that we have now of the crops bad, I would not spend 10, 15, whatever dollars per acre doing a deep placement. Especially because once we do that deep placement with high rates, soil sampling and testing is a nightmare. The variability is so high there, and we have studied this many years here, Fabian Fernandez in Illinois, and there is no nice way to say. So when we have banded high rates of P or K, what I tell people is take double the number of composite samples, take double the number of cores, and then trust the result of the soil testing by half. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. At the end of our series for this virtual field day presentations, you'll be getting a survey from us. We'd really appreciate your feedback on this. So when you have a moment, I promise it won't take more than 5 minutes. Please complete the survey you get in your email. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fifth and final stop on our virtual field day tour. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this week. It's been fun to do all this. It's been a lot of work. And while you saw a lot of names at the end of that video, I can't thank everybody enough for all the time they've put in to make this happen. We certainly hope we don't need to do it in this fashion in the future, and we'd like to see you all face to face. But for now, this is how we need to do our extension programming. So thank you for your support. Antonio, it's time for some questions. We're going to start with a question from Troy. Troy says he is a no-till farmer. He would like to know how far will P and K move down in the profile each year? And then he goes on to comment, it seems the fields I spread P and K each year do better than the fields that get a 2-year spread every other year. Thoughts on why?
Okay, can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Good questions. It doesn't move much. In these experiments, we sample always every year the top 3 inches and 3 to 6 inches. And we see very, very little in the 3 to 6 inches depth, even with the highest rates that we apply every year for both P and K, maybe 1 inch or something like that. Now, these are not sandy soils. Of course, if you have sandy soils, that especially potassium can move more than that. We also have experiments where we put tons of phosphorus with manure during many years that the top soil is about 6 inches, about 300 parts per million by the Bray. And it just moved a little bit to the 10 inches, you know. I mean, never more than a foot, even in those cases that huge amounts have been applied. As of the application every year or every other year, as I said, I didn't show any results, but we found no difference at all. We actually didn't find any difference when we put it before soybean instead of before corn, which actually in some fields that have steep slopes, applying the phosphorus mainly before soybean could be a good idea for the point of water quality, because with the corn residue and no-till, there is not much runoff. So no, we did not find any difference. So it could be applied every other year or every 2 years.
Okay. Thanks, Antonio. We have another question, sort of maybe a little bit of a follow-up on there is, have you done any work on continuous corn no-till in looking at starter fertilizers on continuous corn in a no-till system?
Yes, but very, very little. We have, I don't know, since '94, about 200 trials. We started different types, but with continuous corn, we have only 5, 6 experiments. The likelihood of a response in continuous corn to starter, I think it's a bit higher than in corn soybean rotation because the residue accumulation, especially in no-till. Even there, when people apply these high rates, you know, there is not much response to phosphorus at least. And now sometimes you get a response to nitrogen in the starter, so you need to be careful. Seldom happens if you put the recommended rate pre-plant in the spring. But if you split the rate or put anhydrous in the fall, sometimes starter nitrogen for corn is a good idea.
Okay, thanks, Antonio. Here we have a question from Bill. Bill says, if we are trying to manage soluble P in runoff, would you still recommend a broadcast surface application?
Excellent question. We could have another, not 20 minutes, 1 hour webinar about that. Actually, maybe we can do it, Angie. What do you think?
You bet.
The answer is yes. You see, we have many experiments that we've done. We have about 300, 400 rainfall simulations that I've been in farmer fields, you know, with my guys, Dr. Hack and Louis Thompson and others, looking at that, and also experiments with natural rainfall. And what we show is that in Iowa, southern Minnesota, we have a particular climate, you see, that you cannot compare what happened here with what happened in the Great Lakes, in Ohio, Ontario, things like that. You need to be careful. What happened here is that when the P is applied broadcast in the fall, there is seldom runoff in the fall. So we showed that after that application, you go and then come the snow and then you go in the spring. And by the time there is some snow melt runoff or the spring rains, that phosphorus has been, most of it retained by the soil. See, it doesn't mean fixed, it's retained. And then we also have, with rainfall simulations, many trials with fertilizer, manure, different type of manure, liquid, poultry manure, that it's enough that you put the phosphorus and stays there, even in the surface, with no till, say a week or 10 days, that there is no runoff event, that it is retained. So if you put that broadcast and then it rains, say immediately or within a couple of days, then yes. I mean, if there is runoff, there could be large losses. But if the runoff event is delayed 10, 15 days, it comes down to just 1/4 of what could be lost. So because of that, what I'm saying is put the phosphorus broadcast in the fall. It's okay, before soils freeze, before snow. Don't put it in the winter, okay? Although I think it will react a bit with the soil, but it's more dangerous to put in the spring. And definitely don't put it in late spring, say February, because then if you get, big snow melt or rain, then it will run off. So the danger of the broadcast application of phosphorus is when it's done in the spring. Okay, so if it's done in April or late April or just before planting, because then if you get 2, 3, 4 inches and you have 5, 6, 7, 10% slope, that phosphorus will go. So no problem with broadcast application in the fall or very early in the spring, but be very careful in no-till if you put in the spring, say middle of April.
Thanks, Antonio. Our next question comes from Chad. It says, in these times of low crop prices, would it make more sense to broadcast P rather than use a more expensive starter product?
Yes and no. No, when we are talking about phosphorus, okay? 1 pound of P is 1 pound of P in any starter. There is no difference between the orthophosphate and the polyphosphate and all that stuff, So it's not, so if you put a little bit of starter in those conditions where you expect there could be a response to starter, then any cheap product works. There is a different story with potassium, because potassium, most of the products have a really big salt effect. So definitely in furrow, and of course in soybean, it's not recommended. So there are a bunch of products that are very, very good because they have low salt effect. Essentially, they don't have potassium chloride, they don't have potassium nitrate, things like that, see. So they have either potassium carbonate, potassium hydroxide, or potassium acetate. The potassium acetate is a relatively new product that we have working with those. So in those cases, if the farmer wants to apply starter, then some of these products, a low rate, because they're expensive, complementary of the broadcast fertilization could work, okay? Now, what I have shown, and I have told this I have worked with many companies with this product, is that yes, but really there is no true starter effect of potassium. See, like phosphorus or nitrogen. See, in phosphorus, you may have some optimum phosphorus in the soil, but for some conditions, cold, extremely cold, wet, etc., maybe it's not too available, that's when the starter works for early growth. But for potassium, it doesn't happen. So if there is a response to potassium in the starter, it's because there is a deficiency, because there was not enough broadcast potassium applied. So my So what I tell people is why we're going to spend in expensive products for potassium if what you need to do is just to put enough broadcast. So you are okay, you see. But if somebody wants to do that and is applying the broadcast rate less than recommended, then a little bit of starter with these very good but kind of pricey products, complementary, that could be a good idea.
Thanks, Antonio. Never an easy answer, is there?
Yeah.
Folks, it's right at 8:30. We said we'd be done at 8:30, but we still have a couple more questions. So feel free to continue to hang out here with us, and we'll wrap up a couple of more questions, okay? Antonio, our next question is from William. If soil tests are low, what is the best way to build soil tests higher?
Okay, the best way is to apply broadcast, P/K. Now, you need to think why you're going to do that. What does it mean build up? Okay. The phosphorus rates that we recommend for the low testing categories, the very low and the low, they are sufficient to get maximum yield. Not just maximum economic yield, maximum yield. We do that on purpose because we believe that we should not risk efficiency in low testing soils. And those rates slowly build up. Now, of course, if your field has a potential yield corn of 150 bushel, will build up a lot. If you get to 150 bushels, it will build up less, okay? So you get some build up with those rates that we believe that are good and you are not risking a yield loss and not applying an excess. So if you want to build up, why you would want to do that, especially now with the low prices? I mean, you can do it if you want to. Of course, the idea is manure, poultry manure. I mean, if you can get poultry manure and you put about 2 tons of chicken manure, you're applying phosphorus for 2-3 crops and maybe some potassium too. So yes, you can build up. And I think it may be a good idea, especially if you own the land or have a long-term contract, because that way you manage your soils in that optimum, you know, maybe lower high, something like that, that is less risky, you know, to lose yield. But yes, go ahead, broadcast is the best thing, especially with potassium. If you want to build up, put that potassium in the fall, not in the spring. So we are starting to see that if you put huge rates of potassium, say more than 200, 250, 300 pounds in the spring, even broadcast, you may reduce soybean yield a bit. We're not sure why. Some say it's too much chloride, some say it's the salt effect, we don't know. So build up is easy, especially phosphorus, okay? We have some soils in Iowa that build up potassium, it's not so easy. You can do it, but just think why you would do it, in what condition.
Antonio, we have a question from Jeff. What is the risk applying phosphorus to frozen ground in early winter, assuming not a lot of slope?
You know, my friends for the nurses and the NR don't like when I say this, but this is, if you have a crystal ball and you know that you will not get 4, 5, 6, 10 inches of snow in February, then it's not much of a problem. So you can put it, say, December when soils are frozen, you know, because even with frozen soils and with little sprinkles, you know, flurries of snow here and there, that phosphorus reacts with the surface of the soil. And when we get the snow melt in the spring, there's not much coming off. And we have data proving that. However, you don't have a crystal ball. So you don't know if you put that, you know, and then I remember a few years ago, we have 60 degrees in early January and rain, you see. So if the field really is flat and there is not much runoff and you don't have too many tile inlets, that's another important thing, then maybe it's okay.
But with slope, I wouldn't do it. You see, I would do it in the fall, before the soils freeze and before snow. That's the best management practice, I think.
All right. Sorry, I got distracted. There's a couple more questions I'm trying to read through before I get to them.
Okay.
Just, you know, Antonio, that frozen ground thing, right? It's really comes a matter of, do we apply on frozen ground and then maybe we get a rain that washes it all off versus snow? There's a lot of things to think about, and you're absolutely right. None of us have a crystal ball, right? So, okay. I'm still reading.
Let me interrupt you a little bit. Especially the people are watching us, neighbors, urban people. Some people see a floater there on the fields in the middle of January. That's not a good idea.
Yep. One last question, I think, Antonio, from Lance. Should we expect lower soil test levels for potassium this fall due to the dry conditions? That's a great question.
That's a great question, actually. In fact, I'm thinking of writing some blog or ICM newsletter about that. Yes. The problem is that, again, it's not easy. If it has been dry, so when it is dry, you see the plants are like pumps taking up potassium or phosphorus too during the season, okay? So at about physiological maturity, the soil is the most depleted, you know, in PO K. If so much of it is in the plant. Now, if continues to be dry, okay, then yes, we have seen that, you know. So if you harvest, let's say late September, and then you go taking soil sample behind the combine and it has been dry, then of course, not that much of phosphorus, but potassium will be low for two reasons, because there is no washing off of the potassium in the standing plants or in the residue. See, potassium is very soluble. I have some experiments that I can send you information if you want to, that the potassium leaches off very easily. But also, this equilibrium in the soil doesn't work well when it's dry. So much of the potassium that normally is in this fraction that is slowly exchangeable, some people call it non-exchangeable. If it is dry, doesn't replenish the exchangeable potassium the plants cannot take. So that's if it's dry. Now let's say that has been dry, and then before harvest or before you take a soil sample, you get 2, 3, 4 inches of rain. That's completely different. So that may not be as low as should be, because you have that equilibrium, which is low, starting to react, and then you get that flash of potassium from the even standing plants. After physiological maturity, there is lots of potassium flashing off the plants, especially in soybean. So in general, yes, if it continues to be dry, you will get lower K levels, and it could be 20, 30, 40 parts per million. Okay, so don't be surprised about that. And so my advice is don't sample soil behind a combine when it has been dry, because obviously that would be misleading. And if it is very dry, you're not gonna get a good sample anyway. So the idea is to wait until you get what? I don't know, 2, 3 inches of rain, you see, and then wait about a week. I know. What happens if we don't get that? You know, we wait until the middle of November, we cannot get the soil samples, you know, we don't have time to send to the lab and get the results and so forth. So the answer is yes, but you need to watch what is the rainfall during late September, October, until you take the soil sample.
Great response, Antonio. I'm pretty sure we made it through all the questions. Most of you know how to reach out to Antonio if you have further questions, or you can reach out to me or any of the extension field agronomists, and we'll help you or put you in touch with Antonio. I want to thank Antonio for his time today. I know that this is not how he prefers to do programming, but he did a great job. So thank you, Antonio. I really wanted to give a big shout out to everybody for joining us this week. We really appreciate that. This is really, something new and different we're trying, and we appreciate your support. And I want to thank all our speakers this week. We acknowledged them a little bit earlier in that video, but I can't say enough about our behind the scenes team. So Brandon Kleinke, our video guy, Brandon Zwiefel, our drone video guy, Tracy Knight, who's our communications specialist, along with Chris Kick. And then the person you can't see here is Brent Prignitz, who has managed to take all these pieces of video, pull them all together. He has spent hours and hours this week pulling this all together. So I just want to say thanks to everybody. We have your CCA credits. Please wait a couple weeks to make sure they show up in your CCA statement. It sometimes takes a little bit of time to get those submitted to Madison and to get those and for them to get those entered. So be patient with us as we work through all of that. And I wish everybody a safe fall harvest season. Thanks.